Hi, my name is Israel. I'm from Redbubble. I moved to Melbourne about 5 months ago from San Francisco. I'm a product designer. I'm going to be talking about how we implemented favorites and the animation process. And I'm going to hand it over to Gerald for how we actually built it, which is the important part you're all here to see. Previously, before I was at Redbubble, short bio, I've been designing on iOS for about 9 years. Came here from Crunchyroll. My first gig was working at LastPass, so if you've ever used that, I'm sorry, because that was my first gig as a designer. So why even bother use animation? We all hate implementing it. It's really hard. Animation drives user engagement. I think you can see that across a lot of apps. In recent years, motion design has become ever increasingly popular, and although iOS is definitely a trend-driven sort of design space, app space, I do think it has a lot of value. Again, another reason is affordances. Animations can draw users' eyes. It leads to teachable moments without having to do this really staid onboarding experience. You can do a lot with simple animations that teach your users how the app works without having to put up a wall of text. Call and response. What this is, it's a pretty familiar concept to anybody who writes music. You give the call, the user gives the response. Again, this goes into doing a tutorial and tricking your user into going through a tutorial without actually having to do one. User perception. This is something a little overlooked, but animations can add that little bit of polish to your app that makes it look finished, makes it look high fidelity, and makes it look like you give a shit. And then I've been told this is how an Australian would say it. I'm not going to attempt to do the accent up here and get run off the stage, but the last reason to do it is it's cool, right? It gives you a little cool factor to the app. So how do we start? From a product design perspective, we want to, of course, achieve parity with some of our competitors, so we do some competitive research. Some designers do this, some don't. I looked into how difficult it would be to actually implement this fancy design that I want. I look at all the areas of the app that I'm planning on implementing this design or animation in. If it's on a really complex screen or if there's other concurrent animations, is it going to conflict with them? Looking at middleware solutions or libraries like Anime or Lottie or BodyMovin, which got renamed to Lottie. Try and make Gerald's life a little easier. Then performance considerations. Depending on the app, you may drop support for older devices sooner rather than later. We're an e-commerce site, so we basically go back as far as we can. So I have to make sure that what I'm going to do is going to work on these lower spec devices. We're supporting all the way back to, I believe, 5S's right now. And then accessibility. Accessibility is the last one, but maybe I should have put it first. I think as designers, we tend to think about this last, and maybe as developers too. But there are a lot of people who have either sight impairments or like bump up the size of the text or use voiceover. So we should make sure that these animations aren't hard-coded or canned, that they're going to play over other elements, or they're going to screw up voiceover. So the basic process of how I do this, I start with paper prototyping. That's a really fancy way of saying I draw doodles of what the keyframes are. Sanity checks are going around to, let's say, people in finance or people who aren't developers or intimately associated with our space, and make sure that what I want to implement even makes sense to them. Lo-fi animation. By lo-fi, I mean it's really simple. I'm probably just doing simple scaling or rotation effects or something that's really, really easy to do in HTML5. You can use CodePen for this, as well as GUI environments like Hype. Even like Flash. Framer is also a really quick way to stand up animations, drop a static ping and drop the dynamic element you want. If you can write CSS, you can create a prototype. And then for this, because I knew I would have a developer that I could pair with in a couple days, I did a really hi-fi animation. You kind of see this process here. In After Effects, this allows me to create something down to having it frame perfect. And then, so this is a pretty simple breakdown of a concurrent one. I think everybody has used Twitter. This is obviously the inspiration for our animation. This right here is it broken down. This is not Twitter, but this is a very similar animation into 3 parts. I'm going to talk really quickly about the 3 parts. The halo is an affordance for, obviously we're designing a nice animation, but your finger covers up a lot of it if you're interacting with it. So that expands past people's fingertips. It shows you touched an element. We also decided to add haptic feedback as part of that affordance. The particles, again, are about seeing an effect going on your finger, which means instead of resting your finger on the screen, you might move it away. And then, so this is sort of the combined effect of what that looks like. And then really quickly, I'd like to go into some examples of things that are pretty, but that we shouldn't do as designers or developers. So first one up, the problem with this one, it looks great, but the animation goes on too long. The second one, toggling the animation. You don't want to untoggle things with a completely disparate design style. It's going to really confuse the user. The third one, you don't want to repeat glyphs as part of an animation or spawn them elsewhere on the screen. It's kind of confusing to repeat the same shape for one action. And the fourth one, kind of a material design style. It does look really, really nice, but unfortunately, it kind of disconnects the action from the user's input. It provides too much time for the user to feel like the app is contacting some server somewhere. It makes your app feel laggy, even if you have a great animation like that. So for the implementation part, I'm going to turn it over to Gerald right now. Gerald, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Gerald. I think that mic. All right. Cool. Hopefully that works. Gerald, iOS developer at Redbubble. So I'm pretty new. I think I'm only a month in now. But I got a chance to work on cool animations in that month. So I'll have a chat about that. So I guess just the basic building blocks of the animation. So I'll be talking a little bit about CA animation and some of the, I guess there's 2 basic parts of CA animation. CA basic animation, which is kind of I'm going from here to here kind of thing. CA keyframe animation. So this is like if you have a little bit more than just a simple from to, you can set multiple waypoints. So that's good for that. Also CA emitter layer. CA emitter layer. So this is kind of a special type of CA layer, and it basically just randomly generates particles. And then finally, the UI view animations that we all know and love, like UI view animate, stuff. We'll be using a little bit of that, but let's take a look at how this is done. Cool. So I've made a little playground that kind of shows off the animation. So you can see right here, there's a button that I've just stuck in the middle of the screen. Can everyone see that? Yep. And so when I tap it, it goes boom, like that. Let me show that just one more time, like that. Cool. So since it's a button, it implemented kind of like when you press down on it, it kind of grows a little bit and then pops into its state. That's the unselected state here. And so all that is just scaling it up to 130%, and then if you're unfavoring it, just popping it to the new thing. But if you're favoring it, then we have like a little celebration that goes on. So that's done here. So if you touch up, then let's favorite animate. So let's go into how we do that. So first of all, we chose to draw the heart shape so that was thinking like, oh, I could do it with an image and blow it up, but was thinking like, oh, if we're scaling it a whole bunch and stuff, then I don't want to see like artifacts. So I thought, oh, I'll just try drawing it. So I did that with a CA shape layer.
Hey, Gerald, can you make the text a bit bigger?
Oh. How's that? Cool. Wow, that's big. All right. All right. We'll go over this. So this is just the CA shape layer. So this is just drawing the shape, and it's pretty easy. Like you just set bounds where the position is. I'm choosing to fill it with a color red. This is like Redbubble red. And then I have a method here called draw filled heart. So this is an interesting function in where, here we go, draw filled heart. So it's making UI Bezier path, and I did cheat a little bit here. I use an app called Paint Code. I'll show you that real quick. Oh, that is really small. Well, you can kind of get an idea. It's actually really cool. You can copy paste shapes and stuff from Sketch. So I actually took a Sketch file that Israel handed me and just pasted it in, and it just makes code on how to draw it. And I just basically just copy paste this code into Xcode. So that's pretty much what that is. And yeah, and then for the circle shape, it's kind of the same thing, just using a CA shape layer. So I'm drawing a circle with a stroke and a color. As you can see that right there. And an interesting thing is, so for the initial state of the circle, I want to scale it to be like a little dot in the middle of the heart. And then I'm going to be growing that dot as part of the animation. And so that's right here. So this, using a CA keyframe animation, and then I'm just doing, applying transform to it. And, well, this is a bit hard to see, but maybe I can do that for now. So I'm blowing it up to right here. So there's 3 steps in the keyframe. Is I'm blowing it up from the dot up to 120%, and then I'm moving it back down. That kind of gives it a little pulse effect. And then I can control the timing with CA keyframe animation. So for 70% of the time, it's like growing, and then for 30% of the time, it's shrinking back. And can even control, like, I guess, how it gets from one point to the other. So I'm kind of doing an ease in and then doing an ease out. And then for duration, I guess when I'm doing like a multi-part animation, I like to try to keep it like a fraction of, I guess, a master kind of duration. And that way, like, if I want to slow the animation down, I can just do that from one point. So actually, I should show that off right now. So I have my master duration at 0.8 seconds. So let's change that to 4.8. You can kind of see a little bit what's going on. There we go. You can see it's mostly slow, except for the fact that the confetti is blowing out a bit fast. And that's, I'll get into that a bit later. That's a CA emitter layer that's a bit harder to control. So let's see. OK, so that's now getting to the circle animation. So that's actually kind of a 2-part thing, is that we'll have a ring kind of expanding, and then 50% of the way through, I want to fade it out. That gives it a nice effect. So there's actually 2 parts of it, and they're both CA basic animations. So I'm going from, in this one, I'm just doing the transform, so I'm growing it. And so it's going from 0 to 200%. And that's my duration, and I just want it to ease out, so it kind of slowly grows out. And then the fade is kind of just, I want that to start 50% of the way through of the growing animation. And begin time is how you kind of define a delay for it. And then kind of to make it easier to deal with, use something called CA animation group. So you can kind of like bundle your animations together, and then kind of, I just want this, all of this to apply to the circle. And so that's what I'm doing right here. So you can see that they're kind of bundled up. And so like later on, when I actually add the animation to the layer, I can just define the group. Said, hey, just add this whole group to the layer. Cool. And then finally, there's the CA emitter layer. So this is kind of a cool thing where I think it's part of core animation, and you kind of just can generate particles. And so I have it in this nice function called create explosion. And so it's kind of you have a CA emitter layer, and that's kind of what you use to generate particles. But in order to actually generate the particles, you need a CA emitter cell. And so I'm creating 3 cells, each of different, 4 cells actually, of different colors. And I'm having them, that's the little confetti that you see popping out. So the emitter cells is actually a little bit to configure. I'll just go through this really quick. So it's like the CA emitter cells are actually just, you can think of them as just pumping out UI images. They're just spitting out images. So I've defined the image here in the contents of a ball blue. You can see that's what it's spitting out. And they're quite big, so I'm scaling them down to 10% here. The scale range is like, it's randomly generating these, and you can actually randomly change the size of it. So this is saying like, just vary the balls by 10% when they come out. It's pumping out for 0.3 seconds. The emission range is this is kind of like a cone and where it comes out. So I want it to have like the emitter is like kind of a point, and I want it to emit all around the point instead of just like a semicircle in front of it. The lifetime is how many seconds that each confetti bit lasts. Alpha speed is the fade, so the balls will fade as they come out, and this is kind of just the rate at which they fade out. Birth rate is how many balls I want each one to spit. Velocity is how fast they're coming out. Velocity range is also, so it's like goes between 120 to 230 of, I actually don't know what velocity is. Pixels per second? I don't know. Oh, points, yes. Y acceleration is gravity, basically. And scale speed, they can scale slightly as they're coming out, so they shrink very slightly. And then the begin time, so this is kind of a delay on how, before they start spitting out. So you can see, like, if I had like a duration, master duration of like 4.8 seconds, like I'd have to do all sorts of maths to say, oh, the velocity should go a little bit slower according to that. That was just too much math, so sorry I didn't do that.
We'll show live.
Yeah. Oh, and then finally, when we have all that stuff, yep, just using, so I lied a little bit. Instead of a UI view animate, so I'm using the new UI view property animator, which basically works the same. And that's to just mess with the image view. So you'll see that when the heart kind of, oh, come on. The heart outline is actually an image. So it kind of grows and then shrinks. And then that's kind of what this is controlling the that UI view property animator. And then finally, just to kind of make it easier to like control everything, there's this thing called CA transaction. So I just say, hey, begin, and then I add all the animations, and then CA transaction commit says, hey, just do all the animations. And then it also has this nice thing where you can set a completion block on the animations. Normally for CA animation, like you have to, in order to figure out when your animation's actually finished, there's like a delegate callback. But if you want to be really lazy, you can just do CA transaction, set completion block. And that's where I do all my cleanup and stuff. So I remove all the layers and set everything back to normal. Yeah, so that's how we do the favorites animation. So let's have a look at it in action in the app. So yeah, as you can see, we put it on table slows right here. So this is our search results page, and you can view all the different T-shirts that are mashups. And Israel's just favoring all the things.
That's it.
Yep.
Last little bit.
Yep. So we'll just go back. Yep. Cool. Any questions? Ashley.
I've got two questions, sorry. First, did you actually come up with the values and prototype the whole thing, next in code, in the playground, or did you do it, or did you prepare the playground just to show us? And also, how did you come up with the values?
To be honest, when I first started, I think someone had actually made something similar to like the Twitter favorite and stuff. So I just grabbed that, and then I just started playing with all of the values to try to make it what I wanted. Obviously, theirs is a little bit different. Like they didn't use CA emitter layer. So that one, there was actually an Apple has a sample Mac app, which shoots all sorts of fancy fireworks, and just played around with that until I got the look that I wanted with it. The playground, yeah. Actually, I was developed initially on the playground. I probably got about 90% of the animation in the playground, just because it was really easy to, I could just change the value and I wouldn't have to like start and stop the simulator. It would just run right there in the playground. So that was really nice. And then the last 10%, I did it in the app. But then for this presentation, I have to admit that, yeah, I did port it back to the playground. But yeah, it was actually really helpful to develop the animation in the playground. just because it was super easy to just change the number and see the change appear on the screen.
Just wondering why, obviously a fair bit of code there, not just using something like Lottie. I mean, obviously done a bit of the work already in After Effects and things like that. So why not just use frameworks like that?
I guess you had a little bit of
Yeah, so I've had some extensive experience with Lottie. It does okay with like some path tracing stuff, but it's also pretty good for, let's say, you want to do an onboarding screen and you show a canned animation. It kind of falls apart when you repeat UI elements over and over, especially on older spec devices. As well, I'm really reticent to using a framework which may rapidly accumulate tech debt rather than using out-of-the-box solutions if we can. And another nice thing was sitting with Gerald and designing with him, especially with the Sketch Playground. Lottie puts a lot of pressure on me to find the weird esoteric workarounds for things that don't export perfectly from After Effects. And actually the After Effects comp looked great in After Effects with motion blur on. And when I put in Lottie, there were some weird alias bits and it didn't translate great. We also wanted a bit of dynamic behavior to the animation, so it wasn't the exact same thing over and over and over, especially if you're favoriting the same thing. There was some idea that we would vary the particle direction or something. We ended up playing around with it, and it didn't really work out the way we thought it would, but basically, for all those reasons, I didn't use that framework in this case. If I was going to do a complex sort of onboarding or illustration-based animation, I would still consider Lottie for that, but it kind of falls apart, especially on older devices.
cool. Thanks.
Sorry, I would just say one last thing. I need to talk a little bit more crap about Lottie. It does not generate very pretty things code-wise, so if, let's say, Gerald were to quit and I had somebody else come on board, they might not know exactly what they were looking at. So it makes it really hard to modify it later, like if I get hit by a bus tomorrow. That's it.